the whole battle on August the 15th. Waves of heavily escorted German bombers forced their way through to the RAF airfields. The RAF was so overstretched that some pilots flew 7 sorties that day. By the time the raids died away, some 90 German aircraft had been shot down for the loss of 42 British fighters. The battle continued with equal ferocity over the next few days. Both sides became increasingly exhausted. Dowding tried to rotate his pilots to rest them, but he simply did not have enough of them. Many were being sent into battle with just 10 hours flying experience. The Luftwaffe was suffering too. Its pilots were shocked and increasingly demoralized by the resilience of the British. The RAF fighters always seemed to be waiting for them. As the fighting wore on for 12 solid days, the British losses began to creep up to match those of the Germans. The Royal Air Force was close to breaking. To turn the screw, Goering began using his bombers to attack at night as well. But this decision had an unexpected outcome. On the night of August the 24th, a flight of Heinkel bombers lost its way and bombed the city of London. It was the first attack on a non-military target. The next night, 81 British bombers responded by raiding Berlin. Hitler was infuriated and demanded massive retaliation. This came on the evening of September the 7th. German bombers attacked the London docks and surrounding areas. More than 450 people died and thousands of homes were destroyed. But in fact, this was Goering's second crucial mistake. By switching from the RAF's airfields just at the moment when it seemed about to break, he gave it the respite it needed. Had Goering continued to attack the airfields, the RAF could not have continued to defend the skies. Instead, on September the 15th, British radars picked up another massive assault on London. The first wave of 100 bombers and 400 fighters was intercepted. Fighting raged all the way from the coast. In the afternoon, another fleet of 150 bombers renewed the attack. Winston Churchill was at Fighter Command headquarters that day. After he heard controllers calling in reinforcements from neighboring groups, he asked, "What other reserves have we got?" The reply was, "There are none." But it was obvious that the Luftwaffe had failed to gain control of the air. And on September the 17th, Hitler postponed Operation Sea Lion. The Battle of Britain did not really end, it died away. Hitler now tried a new tactic. By October the 5th, the daylight raids stopped, and the Germans concentrated on bombing Britain's cities by night. This was a so-called blitz. London was attacked every night but one, up to November the 12th. On the November the 10th, the centre of the city of Coventry was obliterated. The Blitz continued into 1941, with the last major raid being made on London on the night of May the 10th. More than 50,000 civilians were killed in the Blitz, but there was never any question of Britain cracking. Victory in the Battle of Britain was a moment of huge national relief. Pilots had come from all over the empire to join the RAF, and from countries occupied by the Nazis like Poland and Czechoslovakia. Churchill summed up the nation's gratitude.
Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few.
But for Hitler, this was no more than an irritating setback. Britain, he was convinced, could never be a serious threat. So he now turned to Eastern Europe. For Britain, there was now a chance to rebuild with a view one day to taking the fight to the enemy. But to do that, Churchill would need help. Britain may have won the Battle of Britain, but it was still immensely vulnerable. Night after night, its cities were hammered by the Nazis' Blitz. Its supply lifelines at sea were under constant assault. Churchill needed more help. And there was only one country that could provide it: the United States. By 1940, the US had recovered from the Great Depression and the economy was booming again. It had immense reserves of manpower and unrivaled industrial strength. But the people of the United States were utterly opposed to becoming involved yet again in Europe's wars. In July 1940, a poll showed that only 8% of them were willing to enter the war. Undeterred, Churchill lobbied the US President, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Roosevelt had long admired Churchill for his outspokenly anti-Nazi views, and the two men shared an interest in naval affairs. Roosevelt had been Undersecretary for the US Navy in 1917. After he became president, Roosevelt kept in touch with Churchill. The two began a correspondence, Churchill signing himself former naval person. For all his avuncular image, Roosevelt had no illusions that German aggression would one day suck America into the war. So he began the long job of preparing American public opinion.
I am a pacifist, but I believe you and I will act together to protect and to defend our science, our culture, our American freedom, and our civilization.
In July 1940, he got approval for a massive expansion of the US Navy, including the building of 6 large battleships and a new class of aircraft carriers. The following month, Congress agreed that the National Guard and other reserves should be called up for 1 year's active duty. And in September, the large expansion of the 150,000-strong US Army was agreed, with a limited number of conscripts being chosen by lottery.
The first number drawn by the Secretary of War is serial number 158.
That same month, Roosevelt announced a deal under which the US would supply Britain with 50 World War I destroyers in return for 99-year leases on bases in Newfoundland and the Caribbean. The British Navy, desperate for more escorts to fight the U-boats, began taking them over within days of the deal being signed. The clearest sign that Roosevelt was slowly winning the argument came in the November 1940 presidential election, when he convincingly defeated the isolationist Wendell Willkie with 27 million votes to 22 million. At the end of the year, Roosevelt spoke to the American people, setting out the 4 essential freedoms which he believed were at stake and which Britain was fighting to uphold: freedom of speech and religion, and freedom from want and from fear. To save these, the United States must become the arsenal of the democracies. In other words, it must arm Britain.
We shall send you in ever-increasing numbers ships, planes, tanks, guns. That is our purpose and our pledge.
But some Americans remained implacably opposed to helping Britain. One of the most outspoken was the American ambassador in London, Joseph Kennedy, father of the future president, John F. Kennedy. A Boston Irish businessman who had made his fortune booze smuggling during Prohibition, Kennedy hated the British and seized every opportunity to claim that they would shortly be forced to surrender. However, Kennedy's virulence was counterbalanced by the growing admiration many Americans felt for the bravery shown by the British people during the Blitz. In particular, the broadcasts by the CBS London correspondent Ed Murrow helped to change public opinion.
This is London. I remember the evening of Sunday, December 29th. It was just like any other winter evening. The first bombers were over London at about 6:30. Soon the fires hissed from the top-story windows. Hitler once boasted, "I will rub out their cities." This is what he meant.
Encouraged by his electoral success, in January 1941, Roosevelt introduced his so-called Lend-Lease Bill. The United States would supply weapons and war material to Britain and China, which was still struggling desperately against the invading Japanese. Payment would be delayed. Roosevelt likened Lend-Lease to lending a neighbor a hose to put out a fire. He would worry about the payback later. Roosevelt was also being canny. It also meant that, unlike in 1917, if America had to enter the war, it already would have a substantial weapons industry. American war preparations didn't end there. Roosevelt secretly authorized U.S. military staffs to discuss a common strategy with the British should America enter the war. By April 1941, he felt confident enough to take another step to help Britain at sea. He greatly extended the Pan-American Security Zone, the area within which U.S. warships would protect U.S. merchant vessels. In May, U.S. troops set up bases in Greenland, and in July, U.S. Marines were sent to replace the British garrison in Iceland, which was there to deprive the Germans of its harbors. The U.S. Navy also began providing limited convoy escorts, particularly for U.S. ships carrying Lend-Lease materials. Hitler now gave his submariners strict instructions not to sink American ships, as he didn't want to provoke the United States into war. But inevitably, there were clashes. On September the 4th, 1941, a British aircraft attacked a German submarine. Thinking that the strike had come from the nearby US destroyer Guerra, the U-boat fired a torpedo